Anyone working in forestry knows weather's always been a factor. But these days, it feels like the rules are changing, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really impacting the industry, especially in the Northeast. I mean, these shifts, they affect everyone from loggers to the mills.
And that's exactly what we're diving into in this FBS podcast, right? We're taking a deep dive into how climate change, with the warmer temps and the heavier rainfall, is kind of shaking things up for folks like you, people
Yeah.
who are right in the middle of their careers and are, having to navigate all this.
Yeah, definitely. We've got some great stuff to dig into today. Back in 2019, Alison Berry wrote that article in the Northern Logger, and she laid out a lot of these challenges. And then we've also got some really fascinating insights from the Forest Business School. They had a discussion on this very topic pretty recently.
Yeah, and one of the things that really stood out to me was how the logging season's changing. I mean, it's not just about a shorter winter. It's like unpredictable. You've got thaws when you shouldn't, and that makes it hard to rely on that frozen ground and those winter roads.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and the data backs that up. If you look at the average temperatures, December and January compared to way back in the 80s, we're talking about a difference of like 3 to 4.5 degrees.
Wow, so that's significant. I could see how that would really throw things off, especially for the loggers who, they really depend on those winter roads for accessing their sites.
Yeah, exactly. And it has a direct impact on, their productivity, their costs. There's one logger, and he actually shared that he has to haul logs at night to avoid all the road closures during the day because of the weight restrictions. Can you imagine like trying to plan around all that?
Yeah, talk about thinking on your feet. But it sounds like even when you can get to the site, the rain itself is causing a whole bunch of new problems.
Absolutely. You get increased rainfall in the summer that leads to saturated soils, and that can bring logging operations to a complete standstill. You get equipment getting stuck, and it becomes incredibly difficult to move the logs efficiently.
So you've got delays on one end, but then what happens on the other end? Does that bottleneck affect the mills?
Exactly. Mills depend on that steady supply of wood, and these disruptions make it really hard to maintain that. So they're kind of getting squeezed from both sides. The unpredictable supplies on one side, and then the pressure to keep up with demand on the other.
Right, so it's impacting the whole supply chain. And then there's the whole issue of best management practices. It's got to be a lot tougher to stay compliant when you're constantly dealing with all that, mud and water.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, maintaining BMPs is already a priority, but the wetter conditions demand, even more time,
Yeah.
resources, careful planning. It just adds another layer of complexity on top of everything else.
It's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
But I'm always amazed by how resourceful people in the industry are. The article mentioned loggers using low ground pressure equipment and portable mats to deal with that wet ground. Have you seen other examples like that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's so cool to see how people are working smarter, not just harder, right? For instance, the mills are getting creative too. They're diversifying their suppliers. They're stockpiling wood during the drier periods, and they're finding ways to be less reliant on just one source.
It makes you wonder, what does logging chance even mean anymore? That idea of like the ideal conditions for harvesting, it seems like that's getting redefined.
That's a really great question, and it's something that came up in the Forest Business School discussion. Some of their insights are really valuable, for anyone who's dealing with a changing work environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into that a little bit. What were some of the key takeaways from that discussion,
Mm.
especially for someone who's, mid-career, like many of our listeners?
Yeah. Well, one of the veteran loggers, he put it this way. A good logging chance, it's not just about favorable weather anymore. He said it's also about having flexible contracts. Contracts that take into account the possibility of disruptions.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just the weather. It's about having contracts that could adapt to the unexpected.
Right, exactly. It's about sharing the burden of uncertainty. Of course, those kinds of contracts, they come with their own things to consider. Both sides need to be clear on what they're agreeing to. But in this climate changed world, they offer a way to be adaptable in a way that traditional contracts just don't.
Right. So it's about finding contract structures that work with this new reality. That's a good takeaway for anybody, in any field where they're working with contracts. Always good to know what's out there and how they work.
For sure, for sure. And while we're talking about, adapting to this new reality, I think it's also important to point out how some folks are using technology to help them.
You mean besides the low ground pressure equipment? What else have you seen?
Well, think about weather forecasting. It's come a long way. Loggers are starting to use these really localized weather models to try to predict when those short windows of opportunity we were talking about, when they might pop up.
So they're using the forecast to decide when and where to harvest, and maybe even to change their contracts based on what they think the weather's going to do.
Exactly, exactly. They're using the data to make better decisions, and that can really help lower some of that financial risk that comes with all this unpredictability.
It's almost like logging chance is becoming this data-driven equation. You've got to factor in the traditional stuff like the soil and the roads,
Yeah.
but then you've got to layer in these real-time weather predictions on top of it.
That's a great way to put it. And it really speaks to how the skill set needed in this industry is changing. Being good with data, understanding how to read and use these weather models. Those are becoming essential if you want to be successful.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and it goes beyond logging. It seems like any field that depends on what's happening outside, like construction or agriculture, they're all going to have to start using this data-driven approach.
Oh, definitely. That's a trend that's just going to keep growing in the coming years. And for folks who are in the middle of their careers, it really highlights how important it is to keep learning and stay ahead of the curve when it comes to tech.
Yeah, it's like we're all becoming data analysts in a way, no matter what we do. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about the human element here. We've talked about needing those strong partnerships and networks. But what about the emotional toll of all of this? The uncertainty, the pressure to keep adapting. It's got to be weighing on people.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a stressful situation. The folks in the Forest Business School discussion, they talked a lot about the importance of mental health for loggers. There's this pressure to just keep pushing forward, but they emphasized the need to take breaks, connect with others, and build resilience.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that these are real people behind the businesses, right? People whose families and livelihoods are being affected by all these changes.
And it's not just the loggers. The people running the mills, they're under a lot of pressure too. They're trying to keep their businesses going, keep their employees working, and meet the demand from their customers, all while dealing with these supply chains that are so unpredictable.
It's a complicated system, and everyone's feeling the strain in different ways.
Hmm.
So what does this all mean for someone like you? Someone who's in the middle of their career, maybe thinking about making a change or learning some new skills. What are the lessons here that they can take with them?
Well, I think one of the most important ones is being adaptable, being able to pivot, adjust your plans, think on your feet. Those are skills that are going to be valuable no matter what industry you're in.
It's about being okay with things being a bit unclear, not having all the answers and being able to work through those gray areas.
Exactly. And that goes back to what we were saying about lifelong learning. The world's changing so fast that if you can learn new skills, adapt to new technologies, and be open to new ways of thinking, you're going to be in a much better position.
It's not enough anymore to just be really good at one thing. You've got to be able to see how things connect, see the bigger picture, and understand how these different systems all work together.
Yeah, it's about being a systems thinker. And to do that, you need to be curious, you need to be willing to try new things, and you need to be committed to always learning.
It's interesting, in the Forest Business School discussion, they talked about how climate change is actually changing what it means to be successful.
Oh, yeah. They talk about how in the past, success in the logging industry, it was measured by, how many acres you harvested or how much wood you delivered.
But now, with all these new challenges, those old ways of measuring things, they might not be so relevant anymore.
Right. Success is about more than just how much you produce. It's about being able to handle uncertainty, build those strong relationships, adapt to the changing conditions, and contribute to a future that's more sustainable.
It's a much broader view of success, one that takes into account the well-being of the individual, the community, and the environment.
And that's a shift that's happening everywhere, not just in forestry. People want more than just a paycheck. They want to be a part of something bigger,
Yeah.
something that has a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, that's such a great point. We are seeing this change in values. People want work that aligns with what they believe in and that contributes to something greater than themselves.
And that's really exciting. It's a chance to redefine what it means to be successful and to create a future that's more sustainable and more fulfilling for everyone.
So if we go back to that idea of logging chance, it sounds like it's evolving into something much bigger than just what the weather's doing. It's about having the right mindset, the right skills, and the right support system to thrive in a world that's in constant change.
That's a really good way to put it. It's about being adaptable, resourceful, resilient, and connected. And those are qualities that are valuable no matter what field you're in, no matter what the future holds.
Yeah. Makes you wonder how is climate change impacting other industries? What are some of the things they can learn from this that might help them navigate all these uncharted waters?
That's a fascinating question, one that really deserves to be explored further. Maybe that's a topic for another FBS podcast deep dive.
I think that's a fantastic idea. We can look at different industries, see what challenges and opportunities they have in common, and share insights that can help people navigate this changing world of work.
I'm in. I think it would be so valuable to have these conversations and learn from each other.
Yeah. It's about sharing what we know, building connections, and supporting each other as we all try to figure this out together.
And ultimately, it's about creating a future that's more sustainable and more fulfilling for us and for the generations that come after us.
This conversation has really got me thinking about my own career, my own path. I've always been interested in sustainable development, but I've never really considered how climate change is going to impact specific industries like this
Yes.
in such a direct way.
Yeah, it's eye-opening, isn't it? And we're just scratching the surface. As climate change keeps unfolding, we're going to see more and more industries having to adapt and evolve.
And that means we need to be ready, both as individuals and as a society. We need to develop the skills, the knowledge, and the mindset to do well in a changing world.
It's about embracing change, being
Mhm.
open to new ideas and willing to step outside our comfort zones.
And it's about remembering that we're not alone in this. There are people all over the world working on this, trying to address climate change, and we can learn from each other. We can support each other
It's about building a global movement for change.
and making sure that no one gets left behind. Because climate change is a justice issue. And the solutions we come up with, they need to be fair and they need to work for everyone.
One of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive is that knowledge is power.
The more we understand about climate change, about its impacts and the potential solutions, the better equipped we'll be to take action.
And that action can take so many different forms. It can be as simple as changing our own habits, or as complex as advocating for policy changes at a national or even international level.
Yeah, it's about doing what we can where we are with what we have.
And never giving up hope.
Because the future isn't set in stone, we have the power to shape it.
It's funny how these conversations always seem to come back to technology. We've talked about, weather forecasting, but in that Forest Business School discussion, they also brought up using remote sensing and GIS to figure out what the site conditions are like.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. There's so much data out there now. Are loggers actually using that to make smarter decisions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They're using LIDAR and aerial imagery to check things like how wet the soil is, how stable the slopes are, even how much timber is on a site. And that helps them plan their harvests in a way that, minimizes the risk of running into problems like, getting stuck in a really wet area they didn't expect.
Wow, that's huge. So it sounds like this is another example of how tech skills are becoming super important in a field that, traditionally was all about getting your hands dirty.
Exactly. And it's changing the jobs themselves. You see this mix of, that old school forestry knowledge with data analysis and tech know-how. It's creating new opportunities, but it also means we need to think differently about how we train and develop our workforce.
It's like the whole industry is transforming. We've talked a lot about the challenges, but what about the flip side? What about the opportunities? Did the folks in that Forest Business School discussion, did they see any areas where there's potential for growth or innovation, given this new climate reality we're in?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They talked a lot about the potential for new markets and new products. The demand for sustainable building materials, it just keeps growing. And the forestry industry is in a perfect position to become a leader in that space.
So instead of just focusing on traditional lumber, they're looking at things like mass timber construction and engineered wood products, and maybe even bio-based materials.
Exactly. Yeah. Those are all areas where the forestry industry can really use its knowledge and resources to create these cutting-edge products that meet the needs of a world that's changing.
That's pretty cool. It's like they're taking these climate challenges and turning them into a chance to build a more sustainable future.
That's the attitude. And it's not just about the products. They also talked about needing more sustainable harvesting practices, practices that focus on the health of the forest, biodiversity, even exploring ways to capture carbon.
So they're really thinking about the whole life cycle of the forest,
Hmm.
from planting to harvesting to regrowth,
Hmm.
and doing it all with an eye toward sustainability, long-term sustainability.
Exactly. It's a whole different way of thinking. Instead of just taking resources, it's about managing these ecosystems so they benefit both people and the planet.
It's like we're entering a whole new chapter in forestry, one that's all about innovation and resilience and a really deep commitment to sustainability.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's an exciting time to be in this field. Despite all the challenges, there's this real sense of purpose and a realization that the decisions we make now, they're going to have a big impact on the future.
And for our listeners who are out there, figuring out their own careers, I think there's a really important takeaway here. Change is going to happen. We need to see it as a chance to grow and find ways to use our skills and our passions to do something that's bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. So to everyone listening, we encourage you to explore these ideas, keep the conversation going, and find your own way to make a difference in this world that's always changing.
This has been a really amazing deep dive into the world of forestry, and it's been fascinating to look at how climate change is changing how we think about work in general.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this FBS podcast insightful and that it got you thinking.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing for change.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.